So yesterday marked the 40th anniversary of A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge from 1985, and I wasn't even aware of that until a couple of days earlier when I was doing my live stream with the live feed of Robert Englund's Star Walk of Fame ceremony. That friend of the channel, Davey Deathray, mentioned that the anniversary was coming up in a couple of days. So I figured this would be a good time to do, I guess you could say, a bit of a retrospective, bit of a look back on the film 40 years later, and it seems like yesterday when it was the 20th anniversary. And that also begs the question to you guys, do you think the film still holds up after 40 years? This film definitely has its lovers, and it definitely has its haters. And the notion of the gay undertones is very prevalent, and that's always been a big talking point for this film. But amongst that, there are also some beautiful elements in this film, whether it be in front or behind the camera. So I guess the best place to start is at the beginning, and after the first Nightmare on Elm Street came out, it was a huge success. At that point, Wes Craven had signed over the rights, the creative rights of this film that he had created, this script that he had birthed, this character that he had birthed, Mr. Frederick Charles Krueger. So at that point, he no longer had control. He had no say in this film becoming a franchise, which it ultimately did, then some. So Bob Shaye, founder of New Line Cinema, said, we need a sequel ASAP. And no joke, less than a year later, we had Freddy's Revenge. Now this time around, in terms of a director, we had Jack Scholler, who was working at New Line Cinema at the time, who had directed some films for Bob Shaye, but also for the most part was an editor. He cut a lot of trailers together. And as they say in the Never Sleep Again documentary, Jack was good at storytelling because of his editing talents, which is something you need in a director. Now when it came to the writer, we had David Chaskin this time around, that even though for the longest time he denied it, but he did write in those gay undertones in the script. At this point, they weren't going to get Robert Englund even back for the film. Robert's agent was quote unquote getting wise, wanted more money, and they figured they could just get anyone to play Freddy, even a stuntman. So they technically did start filming without Robert. There is that story of the shower sequence where you've got the stuntman and the stunt mask portraying Freddy, that's who they were going to use all along. The more I think about it, I don't think that's really true, because you think about it, the stunt mask was completed by then by makeup artist Kevin Yeager, which I will touch on more later in the video. But it seems like if the stunt mask was done, then the prosthetics definitely would have been done. And at that point, you'd have a lead actor cast by then. And I don't think they would have gone back to the drawing board once Robert was cast back in the role as Freddy for part 2 and make a whole new set of prosthetics. I mean, you got to understand, these films, as Rachel Talalay said, were made for $5. They didn't have the luxury to go back and make a whole new set of prosthetics. So I think that story is a little bit muddy in terms of the facts and how it all came into play. I think it was one of those things where cameras hadn't even rolled yet and they hadn't cast Robert. They were going to go with someone else, and then they got him on board. Now, in terms of who else returns for the film, mostly it's people behind the camera. We obviously have Bob Shaye, Sarah Risher, we have Jacques Haken, the late great Jacques Haken, as the DP in this film. In terms of who returns in front of the camera, obviously Robert Englund as Fred Krueger, but 1428 Elm Street, or 1428 Genesee, returns this time with a red door, as well as the glove from the first film, though cosmetically it looks a little bit different. Again, they didn't have the luxury of a bigger budget, but technically they did, but they didn't have the luxury to make a new glove. So they figured, like the Michael Myers mask from the first Halloween, if it's still intact, fuck it, we'll use it in the second one. Now, what really stands out to me in Elm Street 2 is the cast of characters and the performances. We have Mark Patton playing Jesse Walsh, we have Kim Myers as Lisa, we have Robert Russler as Grady, and what I think's interesting is the odd dynamic between all of them, yet they all seemingly care for each other, especially when it comes to Jesse and Grady. They seem like the polar opposites. You got Jesse, who's reserved, shy, nerdy, and then you look at Ron Grady, who is a jock, peak physical condition, good looking chap, and somewhat they just are best friends. And that's what is so tragic. And yes, I'm saying the word tragic at the end of the film when Grady is killed by Freddy or Jesse, however you want to spin it. And all Grady wants to do is protect Jesse. He genuinely cares for him. Yes, they have their tiffs, or if you look into it a bit differently, a lover's quarrel. Again, depends how you look at it, with Jesse going to Ron's place and him having to watch over him whilst he sleeps. It's kind of got that little bit of romance going on there, bit of a bromance, something that's not just a friendship, possibly a bit deeper than that. But it's just so sad to see Ron trying to protect his friend, and ultimately it costs him his life. Now, when it comes to Jesse's parents in the film, Mr. and Mrs. Walsh, played by Hope Lang and Clu Gulager, that's another thing I love as well. These aren't your stereotypical horror parents. They genuinely care, much like Grady, and obviously much like Lisa, and even to a lesser extent, Kerry. But Hope Lang and Clu Gulager bring such gravitas to the roles because they genuinely care about his son. And Mr. Walsh, even though he's a hard ass, there is that sequence where the cops bring Jesse home after they found him wandering around naked, and Mrs. Walsh takes Jesse upstairs, and you see Mr. Walsh just start to break down, thinking what has gone wrong with my son, and possibly what has gone wrong with me as a parent. Have I done the right thing? And that's what I really like. There's a genuine sense of love and care for this son in this film. And even though there are times where, Mr. Walsh is like, Jesse, that's all, a bunch of hooey, you put a goddamn cherry bomb in there and stuff like that. But at the same time, under the surface, he's genuinely scared for his son. Now, one of the biggest points of contention in this film is breaking the Wes Craven rules, like when it comes to the Wes Craven Bible. And that is obviously the pool party scene where Freddy is out and about in the real world when he bursts out at Jesse with a beautiful prosthetic makeup sequence headed by Mark Sjostrom. Now, before we actually get to the pool party, let's go to the changes that are enlisted to the character of Freddy Krueger. So instead of David Miller, who did the makeup the first time around in Elm Street 1, we have Kevin Yeager that stepped in to do the makeup for Elm Street 2. And it's a massive departure from what we started with. So much so they even changed the sweater on Freddy. In part 1, we had no green stripes on the sleeves. In part 2, they added green stripes. I don't know if that was a Jack Shoulder decision, if that was a costume designer decision, or even a Kevin Yeager decision. No one really knows. There has never been an answer. And I actually would like to get to the bottom of that, but that's when we got the iconic stripes on the sleeves. The makeup changes. As we all know, Kevin Yeager wanted to make Freddy look more like a male witch, like proper evil, sunken in eye sockets. You've got the temples showing through, like his skull is pushing through. And between part 1 and part 2's makeup, I think they're just the absolute best in the franchise, especially this shot here of Robert behind a flame that's emitting out of a broken barbecue. He looks like the fucking devil. And then perfect segue into the pool party where you've got Freddy running around with bigger teenagers. You've got 5'9" Robert Englund running around in reality, and it just so badly goes against the rules of what Wes Craven established. And there are a lot of plot holes in this film that you could pick at, but you kind of just give it a bit of a pass. But given the fact, like I said, that Freddy's running around in the real world with burly teenagers that could easily take him down, but at the same time, he's such a threat, people are staying the fuck away from him, even though some people get their guts ripped open, people get slashed in the face, people get trampled on, people get set on fire. As fun as that sequence is, and I do have a lot of fun with it, there are a lot of holes that you can poke into just how wrong that is. But also, and I will say this in my summary, but I'll touch on it now, this film definitely goes against the grain and tries to do something different. But then by Dream Warriors, we go back to our regular viewing. And then the end sequence that takes place in this massive iron foundry that production found that looks so cool, but unfortunately is now a racetrack as far as I know in California. But the end sequence where Lisa saves the day. The heroine saves the day. The girl saves the day. Again, which is nice. Going against the grain, she saves Jesse and saved from Freddy through essentially the power of love. Again, there are so many plot holes here and just so many continuity issues, especially given the fact that Jesse was pretty much burnt from head to toe. A couple of days later, he's just got a couple of bandages on his forearms heading back to school. No psychiatric evaluation, no counseling from all the kids of what they witnessed at the pool party. Parents even shouting their concerns where kids may have told them the description of there was a dude in a red or green sweater, a hat, and a bladed glove. They'd be like, holy shit, that's the guy we killed many, many years ago. What's going on? Do we panic? We must flee. Now, going back to Mark Patton's performance, I think he does such a stellar job and not enough people talk about it. Again, there are the gay undertones in the film, which when I first watched the film back in early 2000s, I watched it on a bootleg VHS that was super dark. And keep in mind, I started with Freddy's Dead and worked my way back to Elm Street 1. So to me, that's a pretty good way to watch him because you start off with like this goofy jokester, but you end with this diabolical, evil monster. And Freddy's performance in part 2 is incredible. It's mean. He's mean-spirited, much like how he was in part 1. but I feel like he's less jokey this time around. And paired with Mark Patton's wonderful performance, he genuinely looks terrified. He genuinely looks like he's concerned with what's going on inside of his body. Something's not right. He's terrified. He's scared. He's trying to reach out to his friends, his family, and then ultimately it just comes out, literally, it bursts out of him. Whether that's, an analogy of coming out of the closet, who really knows? Again, you could dissect a lot with this film, which is great. It starts a lot of conversations with how layered it is with the subtext, but then also at the same time, when it wants to be a good old slasher, it's a good old slasher. So guys, to summarize A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 Freddy's Revenge, and again, this is just all my opinion, and I would love to hear yours down below. Some people see it as the black sheep of the Elm Street family. Whilst I don't disagree altogether, I think the best way I can describe this film is trying to do something different. And that's what Jack Sholder initially wanted to do. He, as he said, felt no compunction to follow the template of the first Elm Street. He said he wasn't exactly the biggest fan. So Jack's come in, David Chaskin's come in as the writer, trying to do something different and going against the grain. And like David Chaskin said, wouldn't it be fun for Freddy to have a human avatar? The idea of possession. And when you bring Freddy out into the real world, where in the dream world, he has his victims, they're in his coliseum essentially, he has control, that is more horrifying than a 5'9" Robert Englund at a pool party where there are teenagers taller than him, even girls that are taller than him that could easily take him down. That's where the character loses its power. But at the same time, the power for this film comes in with being unsure of yourself. And that can be a fucking horrifying thing, especially in the 80s where things weren't exactly as easy as they were now and more open as they are now. We obviously had AIDS coming into the light. People were unsure of what was happening to them, happening to their friends while everyone was dying. So it was a scary time to be someone who was questioning their sexuality and not wanting to come out of the closet. Like how Mark Patton was a closeted man during production, and apparently Jack Sholder had no idea. But I definitely think this film tries to do something different. It goes against the grain, and sure, you could call it the black sheep, and that's why I always see Freddy's Revenge on its own, doing its own thing. It's like an Elseworlds version of Freddy Krueger and the world of A Nightmare on Elm Street, even though it does take place 5 years after the events of the first film. And does that mean it takes place in 1989? We have 1428 Elm Street, we have Nancy's Diary, so there are those little links, those connections to the first film. But then when we go to Dream Warriors, it seems like, okay, we've tried this before, that doesn't exactly work. Now let's get back to our regular viewing with the Elm Street franchise and the world of Freddy Krueger. So I definitely have come around on this film, guys. When I first watched it when I was a kid, I didn't really understand it. I love the performance of Freddy, but the more I watch it, the more I appreciate it, the more I love it, the more I love it on its own. I think it has a lot of good going for it. Warts and all. Like, you could point at so many plot holes and talk about them for days, but at the same time, it's a horror movie. But then at the same time, you have these wonderful performances that, quite frankly, don't belong in a horror movie because they're so layered and so well done. You've got a great design of a character that's springboarded off a damn good design of a character that started the year before. So 40 years on, it's pretty safe to say that Freddy's Revenge has somewhat renaissanced with a lot of people. And there are people that obviously will forever say it's not the greatest Elm Street, and that's totally fine. So with that being said, guys, drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on Freddy's Revenge. Did you see it in the cinema when it first came out in 1985, or have you just recently watched it for the first time, and what are your thoughts? I'd love to hear that. I'm hoping there are each ends of the spectrum where there were people that got to witness this for the first time in the cinema, and if you're just discovering it now on 4K, that's amazing. Like, again, I had to rely on a very dimly lit bootleg VHS when I first watched it, but I felt that kind of helped with how dark the film can be at times, especially Freddy Krueger, even though at one point he does get hit with a doily and it causes him great pain, and then he chucks a tantrum and throws some plates on the ground. That aside, it's a damn good performance. Love you guts, and I'll catch you in the next one.